Moscow to Hong Kong now, and the largest economy in the BRICS group is China. We're joined by journalist and author To Han-Chi, who is in Hong Kong, to find out what Beijing stands to gain from its investment drive in the BRICS bloc. Han-Chi, good morning, or good afternoon, your time, I suppose, in Hong Kong, and thanks so much for your time this morning on our side. Now, let's discuss China's growing footprint in Africa and what Beijing actually expects in return for its increasing investment in Africa. The latest announcement coming yesterday.
Well, I think regarding Chinese President Xi Jinping's trip to UAE, Senegal, Rwanda and South Africa, the big elephant in the room is US President Donald Trump's trade war against China, Europe and many other countries. I see this as kind of China's efforts and the Chinese president's effort to bring in as many allies on board as possible to unite against Trump's trade war against China and other countries. I'm sure Chinese President Xi Jinping foresees the difficulties and the punitive actions on Chinese exports to the United States. So this is part of his efforts to increase more trade between Africa, including South Africa and China.
Now we also see...
it's also part of the Chinese...
Sorry, do continue.
Sorry, go ahead. I also see this as part of the Chinese leaders' wider efforts to gain as many allies around the world as possible against Trump. Earlier this month, Chinese Prime Minister Li Keqiang visited Germany, and the EU leaders Donald Tusk and Jean-Claude Juncker went to Beijing to attend the EU summit where they signed various agreements. One of them is upholding free trade and multilateralism. So this is just part of the Chinese government's effort to gain allies from as many parts of the world as possible in the face of Trump's trade wars.
So let's talk specifically, Han-Chi, about South Africa and China and that relationship, and basically when it comes to business. And is South Africa at a disadvantage, especially given that we send our raw materials over and bring them back in the form of finished goods, which more or less we're paying more for in that way?
Well, a couple of things. It has been reported that the Chinese President Xi Jinping, when he arrived at South Africa, promised to import more goods from South Africa. I don't have the exact statistics of... well, I do know that South Africa's trade deficit with China has been increasing in the last few years. I think 2016 is something like 100 billion rand, roughly on that order. And I also know that Africa has a trade deficit with China. But according to official Chinese statistics, last year, China's exports to Africa only grew like 2.7%, while China's imports from Africa grew something like 32% roughly. And so, Africa's trade deficit with China reduced by roughly 40% on that order last year. So China is making more efforts to buy more from Africa, including South Africa.
So how do they navigate the politics of it all, Han-Chi, when it comes to that relationship? I mean, just looking at, we've had issues in the past, controversies in the past, with letting the Dalai Lama come in to visit here, South Africa, and having to have some sort of obligation to China to not allow that. So do the economics far outweigh the political, ethical issues when it comes to relations between these two countries?
Well, I see parallels between China's relationship with South Africa and China's relationship with Malaysia. In South Africa, in February, Jacob Zuma stepped down as president, and Cyril Ramaphosa became South African president. In Malaysia, in the elections in May, Najib Razak was defeated and stepped down as Malaysian Prime Minister, and Mahathir Mohamad took over as Malaysian Prime Minister. And currently, both Najib and Jacob Zuma face corruption charges in their home countries, while Mahathir and Cyril Ramaphosa presumably are stepping up the fight against corruption. This really tests China in various respects. I mean, China pledges a policy of non-interference in other countries' affairs. So, the question is whether China really holds good to its pledge and will treat deal accordingly with whatever leaders in charge in whether it's in South Africa or Malaysia. And secondly, Jacob Zuma is alleged to be linked to a corruption scandal involving the Gupta family in South Africa. And this corruption scandal involving the Gupta family is alleged to involve companies from America, Europe, and China, although there's no proof of any wrongdoing. I mean, all parties are presumed innocent until proven guilty. So the test is whether the Chinese leaders will let justice run its course, and if any Chinese company or party is found guilty of corruption in South Africa, to allow them to take the rule of course to take its due course. It's similar in Malaysia. Right now, Mahathir's new Malaysian government is investigating for possible corruption several major China-backed projects in Malaysia. So I see South Africa and Malaysia both as a test for China's Belt and Road Initiative, which is China's plans to basically connect with other regions in Africa and Asia and Central Asia through trade routes and infrastructure projects like roads and railway. China vows to have a clean Belt and Road Initiative. So how China handles any potential corruption that erupts out of South Africa or Malaysia will be a test of how sincere China is in its commitment to ensuring as little corruption as possible in Belt and Road.
Especially since it's putting money into the country. Thank you
very
much for that.
Which is, of course, important because if the Belt and Road has an image of corruption.
Yeah, we'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much.
Tho
Han Chi, journalist and author in Hong Kong for us this morning. We apologize a bit of a delay to that line there, partner, but it will be interesting to see what exactly happens. I mean, we also know China competing with India for business here in Africa. How